I'll be using number 13 or 9mm circular needles. I'm using some bamboo ones here because I just happen to like them. And this one comes in 36 inches or 91 centimeters. And here's what they look like with just two pointed ends, and then we've got all this nylon cording in the middle to hold all the stitches so we can make a nice cozy big throw or blanket. And you'll want to find yourself a nice big-eyed darning needle with a blunt end so you can get your thick yarn through the eye of the needle. And you just need a pair of scissors to cut off your yarn. I'm choosing to use Bernat Blanket Yarn. This particular ball has 220 yards in it, or 201 meters. And this is a super bulky 6, and the color is whipped cream. This is the yarn I have chosen because it's so nice and soft. But if you want to use anything else, feel free to change it up and just look for another super bulky number 6. And here's the super easy pattern, which is great for beginners. All you're doing is you're knitting your first row, and then we're going to come in on the next row, start a knit. These little asterisks mean the next stitch is purl 1 and then knit 1. So when you see the asterisks, you know that you're going to repeat the pattern, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1 for row 2. In row 3, you're going to start with purl 1, and in the asterisk, you're going to repeat the pattern, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, all the way along row 3, and row 4, starting with knit 1, and then purl 1, knit 1, and repeating purl 1, knit 1 through the whole row, and then you come back and you start purl 1, and you go again. I just make up a little tiny graph here on a piece of lined paper, or get yourself a piece of graph paper, which is even better, and I just write out what I'm doing. Row 1 knit, row 2, row 3, and row 4, and every time I finish a row, I just come in and put on a check mark. Finish row 2, check, finish row 3, check, finish row 4, check, and so on. Keep going along and keep doing your rows. Running out of room? No problem. You can come back and now take these check marks and turn them into X's. Row 1 done, row 2, row 3, row 4. First thing we need to do is to make a slip knot. So find the end of your yarn, over your right finger, bring it around, bring it through the hole, and pull your two ends for your slip knot. So now let's take your slip knot and put it onto one of your needles, slip it up, tighten it up a little bit, and now with your long end coming off the ball of wool, we're going to knit 83 cast on stitches. So bring your other needle into your slip knot, and you should get in the practice of having good tension. So I wrap it around my finger like so, and then I bring it up onto my index finger for my tension. So what we're going to do, wrap around, bring that through, and you've made another stitch. Now I'm going to come into that stitch, wrap around again, and now you've made another stitch. Number 3, wrap around, and another one. So continue doing this until you've got 83 stitches on your needle, and it'll start to fall down and fall onto the nylon cord in between the needles, which is what you want it to do. And don't do these too tight either, because if you do, then you're going to have a little tight binding, and then your knitting is going to go further out, further up. So try to make this a little bit on the looser side. And then when you're ready to come in and do your next stitch, this one becomes your last one. So that will become 83. So you can go back and just count them all again and just make sure that you have 83 stitches. Now you're ready to do row 1, which is all knit stitches. So in we go to the first stitch, wrapping around, and this time we're going to pull that right off. Next one. Into the stitch, wrap around, pull it through, and slide it off. And continue to knit your whole row. And here's my last 2 stitches from my knit row. There we go. We've completed row number 1. And on my handy little chart here, I'm going to check off I've done my first row. And now the next row, we're going to start with a knit 1, and then we're going to repeat the pattern going purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, and continue along the row. So here's our first stitch. We're going to knit 1, and now we're going to purl. To purl, we need to bring our wool forward and around the needle. And now we're going to come into the front of the stitch for our purl. Yarn around and finish that stitch and pull it off. Now we need to bring the yarn back to the back again, and now we're going to knit 1. Knit, and to purl we need to bring the yarn forward into the front of the stitch, yarn around, and that one comes off. And the next one is a knit again. If you lose track of what you're doing and you forget if you're doing a knit or a purl, then just look at your stitches. This is the knit and this is the purl, because it's got the little ridge and the bump on the bottom of the stitch. There's your knit, and again here's your little bump, and that's the purl. And so here I am on my last 2 stitches. Got a purl to do. And my last stitch is a knit. And if you look on the pattern, you'll see that for row 2, my last stitch should have been a knit, so you know that you've done it right. So now let's do row 3. We're going to start with a purl stitch. So we're starting with our purl into the front of the stitch, wrap around, and then our pattern is knit 1, purl 1 through the rest of the row. So there's our knit 1, and forward into the front, purl, and back to knit, repeating that pattern of knit 1 and purl 1. And we'll see you at the end of the row. And as you can see, you know that your last stitch should be a purl 1. If it's a purl 1, yay, you got it. And my next stitch is a knit indeed. And my last stitch, purl. And that completes row 3. And here we are starting row 4. Starting with our knit. And then our pattern is purl 1 and knit 1. And repeat that pattern of purl 1, knit 1 till you get to the end of the row. And here I am on my last 2 stitches. So I'm doing a purl and a knit. And I end on a knit, and you should end on a knit. That's your last of your row 4. We've now completed rows 1 to 4, and that is our pattern. Now we're just going to repeat that pattern through the whole blanket. So we're going to start again with row 1, which is all knit stitches, and then we'll do row 2, 3, and 4, and go back, and then start row 1 again, and just keep going and going and going. So I'm going to continue my knit row here. And when I finish the first ball, I will stop and then show you how I join my wool together. And this is what your hurdle stitch is going to look like. Here's your knit rows, and those are forming what we could call a hurdle in between our other ribbing rows of knit and purl in between. I've just finished knitting my first ball. And I've come to, well, this is actually folded in half. I've come to 25 inches, so that's about 50 inches in width. And that totally amazes me because I totally guessed at casting on 83 stitches, and I got exactly the size I wanted for my width. And after knitting my one ball of wool, I've measured down, and I've got 19 inches of knitting from one ball. So now I know that if I use 4 balls, this will give me a really nice size for a throw. 4 balls times my 19 inches gives me 76 inches, or 193.04 centimeters. I've got my 50 inches from my width, so I can do a standard size and do 60 inches, or I can go a bit bigger and do 72, or I can go a bit bigger and I can do 76 inches for my length, because my 4 balls will give me that length if desired. So it's time to add my next ball of wool. Here's my new ball, and here's the end, and here's the end that I've just finished knitting with my first ball. And to tie my 2 pieces together, here's my left, here's my right, my new ball. So I'm just going to go left over right, and then the right over the left and through. And that actually makes a square knot. We'll pull that tight, and that'll be nice and tight when we add our next ball. I find if there's something that you're going to be throwing in the wash a lot, it's better just to tie a knot, and you don't have to worry about that. So let's knit up to that point. And our next one is a purl. And our next one is a knit. So now when you're finished all your knitting, you're going to go back in and you'll be sewing these into your knitting, and we'll do that at the end. I just ended on row 4. This is a great place to stop because it'll complete your pattern of having your 3 rows and then looking like you've got your knit row, but your last row will be your cast off row. I've decided to stop here. I've got a measurement that's about 50 inches by 60 inches, and that makes for a standard throw. So that took 3 balls of the yarn that I've used. If you want to make a longer throw, then keep knitting with your 4th ball. So now we're ready to cast off. When you've decided if you want to make the shorter standard throw size or the larger, then make sure you've got enough yarn left over to do your cast off. This is what I've got left for my 3rd ball. So what I would do is just grab your yarn when you're ready to finish and measure out 3 to 4 body legs. So there's 2, 3, and 4. And that's what I've got left. So now I know for sure I've got enough to cast off. So let's start our cast off now. We'll be doing a knitted cast off. So let's start with our first stitch as being a knit. Here's 1 knit, and let's do 1 more knit. Now that you've got your 2 stitches, you can come in to that first stitch, slip your needle into that stitch. We're going to pull it over that second stitch and slide it off. Let's do that again. One more knitted stitch. Take the first one, insert your needle, and I'm pulling down on my yarn just a little tiny bit so I make sure that that stays in place. So I just pull down a little bit, and then this one slips over top and off it comes. Now don't try to make those too tight because you don't want your cast off to be quite tight and then your knitting coming out further. One more. And in and slip off. And there you've got your cast off. So continue on and cast off all your stitches, and I'll meet you at the end. And here's my last knitted cast off. Taking my needle, slipping that off, and now I have 1 stitch left on my right needle. Now we can cut off our yarn. Leave about 10 inches or so, and just loop that up a bit higher, slip your needle off, and then we're just bringing our end of our yarn through that loop and pulling tight. And now the last thing to do is to take our darning needle with the big eye, and we'll be threading in all our loose ends from joining our wool in the beginning of our blanket and the end. So what I like to do is just pull the yarn very, very tightly over the eye of the needle, pull it down, slip it off, and then that slides through the eye of the needle nice and easy, and you can pull it out. So let's start here. Here's our cast off. We're going to go right below. I'm going to come into this one, and then I'm going to come into the last row of knitting and just weave back and forth. And pull that through. And when you've got that pulled through one way, I like to just give it a bit of a tug. And now let's come back in the other direction and weave through again. To finish it off. Take off the needle, again, give it a bit of a tug, and then snip it off. You're going to do that with all your pieces of yarn that you've joined together and at the beginning of your blanket as well. Relaxing with my coffee and my cozy blanket. Till next time, bye-bye.